and welcome to the Sacred Matrix. And I'm your host, Janet Carol Lessin, and I'm here with my co-host, Dr. Sasha Alex Lessin. Our producer is Thomas Becker, also known as a Mad Painter, and you're listening to Revolution Radio on Studio B. And our guest today is Michael W. Hall, and he is the Paranormal Lawyer. He's an attorney, doctor of jurisprudence, and former Superior Court Judge pro tem. As an experienced UFO field investigator for the Aerial Phenomena Research Organization, Hall was a long-time consultant to the Mutual UFO Network and the attorney of record for the National UFO Reporting Center and National Aviation Reporting Center on Anomalous Phenomena. And he is an experiencer himself. He has also represented such noted ufologists and researchers as Grant Cameron, Chief Petty Officer Kevin Day, Peter Davenport, Dr. Richard Haines, and Dr. James Harder. Tell us about why he was representing those people. And he's got a number of presentations. I have a full page with all kinds of information and photos and pictures on aquarianradio.com. I invite you to go over there and check it out. Dr. Lessin, what would you like to say about today's show?
Well, first, just a general thought about today. It's sort of the theme of when everything's really junk, as bad as it can possibly be, out of the ashes, something great. Just remember, in the winter, far beneath the bitter snow lies the seed that in the springs, with the sun's love, becomes the rose. It's the idea. What seed do we each have? What do you, listener, have in you that's just ready to come out? And it's been nourished. Now you've gone inside and meditated while you've been locked in. And what's the seed that's coming up for you? If you could imagine going into your potential, what do you really want to do while you're still alive in this body? Picture it now. Do like a remote view of your future self at your best. If everything comes out just the way you want it to come out, what do you get?
Just for those who might be listening to this somewhere down the line, this is Easter Sunday, 2020, and most of the world is locked down with the coronavirus. So, with that, Michael, welcome to the show.
Well, thank you, Sasha. I am just so glad to be here. And Dr. Lessin, this is just wonderful to spend some time on this really special day, obviously, around the planet, believe it or not, Easter Sunday. But I don't think I have ever had the opportunity to experience the idea that we can't do anything socially on Easter Sunday. This is the ultimate social day of basically the generation that I grew up with. Everyone went to church and wore their best outfits, all that. So it's wonderful to spend the time with you.
Well, we're so happy you're here with us today. So we're going to celebrate Easter in whatever way you celebrate. When I was a kid, we would literally go get Easter bonnets. It was kind of like a leftover from the 40s and 50s. I was a kid in the 50s and 60s. So, yeah, it was definitely a high day of celebration. So we can celebrate here. We don't have to be person to person. And so, we're going to talk to you about whatever you want to talk about. You're very knowledgeable. And where do you want to go? What direction do you want to take today's conversation? We'll follow your lead.
Well, thank you for that. And, I really think Sasha gave a great transition to maybe a beginning of the show where he mentioned Bette Midler's song, The Rose, which was just, I'm a old musician myself. When Bette Midler came out with that song, it's so poignant, so deep, the fact that literally life throws a lot of things at you. But obviously, at one point, there does come the springtime, and life starts anew. And I think that's exactly where we are at now on the planet. Literally, this coronavirus shutdown and social distancing is forcing everyone to go within inside themselves, I believe. Take stock of who the heck they are, as Dr. Sasha was mentioning. This is our chance to make our rest of our lives maybe better and give us an opportunity. It's almost a forced stay at the local monkery, where you take a day off or a week off or even a month or more and kind of spirit yourself away and think about yourself and how have you done so far in your life? What would you like to accomplish? And indeed, what is important to you on a moment-by-moment basis? So this indeed is going to be a new beginning for many people, I believe.
Yes, and the people that are hunkered down are starting to get to know each other again. We're so busy in our everyday lives. I was just reading an article about a husband and wife, and she was so used to being independent and, barely saw her husband, and they had these independent lives, and then all of a sudden they were there 24/7. Oh no, you're in the way. I'm trying to get in the fridge. Oh no,
Somebody discovered some kids at his house.
On the talk show host. Hey, I woke up and there's these children in the house. So it's a chance for us to get to know each other, but to deepen our relationships with these people that are in our lives and pick up the phone or the Zoom or the Skype and, learn how to use technology and connect no matter where you are. So that's one thing I find. For a while there, every day, I had all these people calling me. It's like we're all on each other's deathbeds and we're calling. We have to hear you one more time. But I think that's kind of relaxed a little bit over the last week. But the first 3 weeks, it was this frantic calling, everybody checking in on each other. It was very interesting.
And I think that is another maybe unintended positive consequence that's going to be coming out of this entire event. The idea that people are almost forced now to learn technology a little bit better. I think even the baby boomers like myself, would be more motivated now to get the old Skype out and learn how to do Facebook and even, email, just the standard things that the older generation probably never really learned, to keep in touch with their family and friends. And I know people are hooking up with high school classmates that haven't talked in generations, in decades. So the idea of technology bringing us closer together around the world is fascinating as well.
And then the air is clearing. Believe it or not, LA had the cleanest air in the world last week. It's like, what? LA with all that smog? So
yes,
we're being that we can do this. We can stop. Oh, and then people are stopping. They're laying down their arms and they're calling a truce. So why not continue? Maybe this is the end of war.
The Israelis had to just open the border to the Palestinians so they could because they're the people that depended on to do the work. And it's the same thing. We're all in this together. You have to have universal health for everybody, or everybody gets sick. And so it makes us all realize we're all in this together. And so this is an opportunity to reflect on our unity. If we're going to, we need to take care of everybody, or everybody dies.
Yes. Matter of fact, it is very reminiscent to me of the 1914, World War I scene at Christmas time, when the troops on both sides of the trenches laid their arms down and sang Christmas carols together, exchanged some Christmas gifts, and got to know each other a little better, and realized, what are we doing? We're the same kind of person, same kind of ethics, and we are forced to fight against each other. That was a fascinating experience, I think. And I think as a result of these kinds of things, the entire consciousness level collectively for the planet is rising very swiftly.
So with that in mind, I hope that we take this to the next level when we meet extraterrestrials. And I'm a contactee experiencer, and I've had a lot of experience in my 66 years of life with many different extraterrestrials. So, and you too, Michael. Can you tell us about your experiences?
Yeah, my experience that I can relate to, actually, kind of have some proof of, happened later in life. It was only January 10th of 2012 that I experienced a major interruption in my my own thought patterns, as it comes to the idea that what I thought I was doing and experiencing didn't quite happen the way I thought it would. Up until that point, I had always been interested in the paranormal, the Fortean, and the supernatural. But I had always been able to say, well, I've never really seen anything unique other than, just strange lights in the sky like most everyone had seen. But literally, I can give you a synopsis of my experience on that night, winter night, January 10th of 2012. I am going to my son's middle school parent meeting. And of course, as a parent raising 4 children at the time, they're all adults now, you periodically have to go once a month to those PTA meetings at school just to catch up on what's going on. And literally, I was going through quite a horrendous divorce at the time after 30 years of marriage. And so I had to make sure that I could prove I was involved in my children's, education. So it's dark out. It's, probably 6:45 p.m. and I'm driving to the school. I get out and go in and sign in on the parent sign-in sheet at school, which everybody did, just to prove that you're there. And also, I took a very quick cell phone photograph of my signature on the sign-in sheet, just to make sure I had proof that I was there in case I needed it at court for some reason, all that stuff. And of course,
as an attorney, yeah.
As a lawyer, you're thinking, oh my gosh, I better do this, But I really enjoyed the meetings anyway. These were monthly meetings that literally one class in the school, their parents are designated to bring all the goodies, the brownies, the donuts, and the coffee and all that stuff. So I literally loved to go there. This was before I lost 150 pounds to bariatric surgery, and I was weighing close to 400 pounds at the time and really looking forward to these meetings. And literally the meeting starts at 7 o'clock. Go through all the details of what's happening at school, and at 8:30, an hour and a half later, it's all over with. And of course, I only live about 4 minutes, literally 4 minutes by driving time down the hill from the school. So I get pull up in front of my house at about 8:37 p.m., and it's a beautiful winter's night. Full moon out that night. No stars per se, because the moon was basically overwhelming all the light. And no clouds, just a clear, beautiful night. So I decided, as I'm walking up the front steps to my house, I whip out my little iPhone 4S, and I decide to take 2 pictures of the moon. Knowing in the back of my mind, of course, that when you take pictures of the moon with your cell phone, it's not going to be very impressive. Usually it's pretty small. But I did anyway. Went inside, had a wonderful evening, and just relaxed. The next morning, I go to my law office. First thing I always do is plug in my phone to my laptop computer, make sure it's charged up during the day. And the first thing that happens is my computer asks me if I want to download any of the new pictures that I took the night before onto the hard drive of the computer. And so I just automatically click yes with the mouse, and everything starts downloading. And the 2 pictures of the moon pop up on the larger screen of the laptop. And it's just kind of more impressive. I'm going, wow, that's a beautiful picture of the moon. But uniquely below the moon was this very weird bright red dot hovering below the moon. And I'm going, well, that doesn't make any sense. I didn't see that there when I took the photo. I know my neighborhood. I know that it's not a street light. I know it's not anything that should be there in the scene that high up in the atmosphere, but below the moon. So I decide to run these 2 photographs through a photo enhancement app that I have on my phone. When I do that, my goodness, when I'm looking at these photos again, I'm seeing an outline of an isosceles triangle hovering below the moon with a red dot in the center of the black image that's blocking out everything around it or behind it. Now, I'm totally amazed at this because I didn't see anything at the time when I just snapped these two photos of the moon, basically only 1 second apart. So then I get curious and I go to my camera roll on my phone. Now, if people aren't familiar with the technology on your phones, your camera rolls, basically every photo that you take is laid down on your phone in the order that you take it. And when I looked at the camera roll on my phone, I realized, oh my goodness, the last photo listed on my camera roll is the photo of the sign-in sheet at the school that I took last night when I signed in at the meeting. When I got to thinking about that, I go, and that's impossible because I signed in and took a picture of it and then went home and then took the two pictures of the moon. So I started getting real curious, and I'm just wondering, is there anything else as glitched up as this on my camera roll? So I go back farther. Sure enough, the photographs I took of my son's basketball game the night before were right where they're supposed to be. Everything else seemed to be in order in the camera roll. So then I get this brilliant idea. Since the photos were already downloaded to my laptop, I don't know if people know this, but many folks might. You can right-click on any photo once it's on a desktop or a laptop, and you can get the metadata from that photograph. Metadata meaning all sorts of information and scientific evidence about the photograph, when it was taken, where it was taken, what time it was taken, all sorts of interesting information. So I decided to look at the metadata for the last two photographs that I thought I took, which were the moon photographs, and then the sign-in sheet. Literally, the sign-in sheet was correct. It said, I took the photograph of the sign-in sheet about 6:45 the evening before, but the last two photographs, the previous two photographs, the ones of the moon, says in the metadata they were taken at 3:37 a.m. and 3:38 a.m. on the same day, 17 hours earlier than I thought I took them. And that's really freaking me out because literally I could swear on a stack of Bibles. I got home from the meeting, at the school, walked up the front porch of my house and took a picture of the moon at 8:37 p.m. So there's a whole lot of other things that go along with this story, but literally that is a time in my life where I could not get past the idea of a potential screen memory of me having taken the photographs when I thought I did, not being true at all. Totally, supposedly, not taken when I thought I took them. By the way, I don't take any photographs at 3:37 a.m. I'm pretty much sound asleep every night. I literally have sleep apnea and sleep with a CPAP machine, and it's a major thing for me to get a full 8 hours of sleep. So I would recognize the fact that I didn't sleep all night long if that was the case. So that's my story in a nutshell.
So the main thing I'm getting is that it was proof to you in a way that was not just an idea. It was like an experience that blew your cosmic egg.
Yeah, exactly, Sasha. I love stories. I love anecdotal evidence. Of course, you can use anecdotal evidence in a court of law, first and testimony, all of those things. But I definitely am the analytical type lawyer as well that wants to be able to, before I mention my story to my friends, I want to say, take a look at this information I have there. This is interesting stuff purporting to be the truth and have nothing to do with my memory of what happened. So I really love it when I can bring actual empirical evidence to a court of law to prove basically what I'm thinking beyond a preponderance of the evidence, not the standard of legal proof for a criminal matter, which is beyond a reasonable doubt, which is very strong standard of proof. Preponderance of the evidence is just basically 50%, 51% of the evidence points towards something being true. Maybe 49% points to it not being true. But if it's over 50% proof, then you've got a preponderance of the evidence. And I believe I've got some evidence of this case and others as well to prove the existence of something very strange going on around us that we don't even understand.
Okay, so what is it that is being communicated to you? What is it, the message that you've selected yourself, or you've been selected to share with everybody?
I wish I could tell you that, because I don't have, some contactees, experiencers will say, gosh, I had this dream as well at the same time or shortly thereafter that gave me some kind of a message, some all import, that I need to bring forth. And I have an overwhelming urge to do so. Although, you know what, Sasha, my entire life.
That is the message. That's right.
Yeah.
That is the message. That is the message, exactly, that there's much more to experience and to what is than you and everybody have thought, and you can prove it.
And I think you're exactly right, because the only thing I've come away with from this unique experience of mine is that I believe they're telling me now it's time for you to really wake up and realize these things are happening. We've heard of all these stories. I've studied many of them and been involved in ufology and the paranormal for well over 30 years. But I think it's almost as if there is a quickening happening, definitely to myself, or synchronicities happen more often. The idea that, people's stories are becoming less reticent to come out of them ever since the New York Times article, in 2017. So I think there is definitely a faster revelation happening on the planet.
So I wanted to take you a little bit back in time, because you've been in this a long time. When did you start getting interested in paranormal and ufology, and what happened that sparked your interest? What was your childhood like, that type of thing?
Yeah, definitely. Well, I am from the Pacific Northwest. Literally, I was born in a small rural community in eastern Washington state called Walla Walla. Many people probably remember that name just because it's been used in many 1950s hit songs, The Purple People, all those kinds of things. But literally, it's a beautiful farming community in eastern Washington called Walla Walla, Washington. And at that point, growing up, I loved, all the unique things that I heard about Buck Rogers, and the old dime novels that you would see at the old dime bookstores or the dime stores on the corner. And literally, I would read the ones about the contactees, George Van Tassel, George Adamski, these guys who literally back in the 50s claimed that, hey, it was no big deal. They literally were talking to extraterrestrials from Jupiter and Venus and various planets around our galaxy on a first name basis out in the desert. So then my family had an opportunity, because my father got his doctorate in education at Columbia University in New York City, to move to the Big Apple. And literally, boy, my world exploded at that point, because comic books came into my life, when I was about 10 years old. And I'd take my weekly quarter of allowance that I would get, and I would go down to the local, 5 and dime store called Grable's on the corner of 121st Street and Amsterdam Avenue. Actually, it was Broadway, between Amsterdam and Broadway. And I would purchase, 5 cents worth of 3 penny candy, which gave you 15 pieces in a nice little brown bag. And, of course, a packet of gum for 5 cents, which had baseball cards in it. And you could swap those with your friends all day long and have a big slab of bubble gum to chew at the same time. And then a 10-cent ice cream cone, icicle, that I just love to have a hot summer day, on the street in New York City. And the last dime was saved for my comic book of the week, that I would find Superman, Green Lantern, Superboy, Supergirl, all those superheroes, and just dream about the idea of other worlds, being reality and that kind of stuff. And so I started as a kid doing all of that, of course. Now, when I got older, in college, literally in 1974, I joined the APRO, Aerial Phenomena Research Organization, as a field investigator. They're based out of Arizona. Jim and Coral Lawrenson were in charge of that group, and that was literally the biggest and first, along with NICAP back in those days, UFO organization that put out a newsletter and had, resources for investigation of sighting reports. Dr. James Harder at that time was the chief scientist. He was from Berkeley, California, and he had his PhD in hydroengineering, actually. So quite a scientist, but he was interested in UFOs. And Dr. Harder was the first investigator to get a hold of Travis Walton after his alien abduction experience in 1975. Literally put Travis Walton under hypnotic regression at that point, and was the first major investigation into that incredible sighting report back in the 70s. Then, as I grow older and, many things in my life, I'll stop here and let you ask another question if you'd like, but I've got many, many things to happen before I became the old paranormal lawyer.
Yeah, well, I just had a quick, because you were in New York, and I guess you're still in New York by 74, 75, right?
No, actually, I had left there in 68. And so back in 75, I would have been back in the Pacific Northwest, and I went to Washington State University in Pullman, Washington, and got my broadcast journalism degree from the Edward R. Murrow College of Communication at Wazoo.
Okay. Well, I thought you were in New York during the Star Trek conference that we were bringing back Star Trek, because I was there when I was 21 in 75. We got it renewed. But you were gone. But there were 20,000 people there getting Star Trek renewed. It was a big deal. So, okay, so back to your story. Sorry to interrupt, but I thought you might have been in New York. Back to your story. Go ahead. That would have
been fun, obviously. Holy mackerel. I was a big Trekkie fan myself, of course. After college, I literally decided after I got my degree, I had to get a degree in something, so I ended up a broadcasting degree. But instead of doing that, I decided I was going to move to Hollywood, California with my brother, who literally studied fashion design, and he was ended up being a Hollywood costumer for the movies. He did Somewhere in Time with Christopher Reeve and Jane Seymour, Christopher Plummer. He did the Star Trek movies. He did many of Arnold Schwarzenegger's films for well over 35 years. So while we both moved to California, I was doing the old thing like everyone else, trying to sing in clubs and getting the acting jobs and doing the Hollywood thing for literally over a decade. At one point, I found the most amazing position of being the host in the green room backstage at Universal Studios Amphitheater, where Sinatra opens the season every year for a week of shows, and all the rock groups and all the country acts and all the big musical groups would come through the amphitheater, and I was the gopher guy backstage, getting to the stage on time and taking care of the parties after the show. At one point then, I realized, I could be doing this probably the rest of my life, and decided to go to law school. So that's when that changed. And then, of course, after law school, it was a lot of fun. I really enjoyed it, and didn't go to law school till I was 32 years old. Was fortunate enough to get through law school in 2 years rather than have to take 3 or 4. But then I came home to the Pacific Northwest and started opening my own law office as a general practice guy. When I decided, you know what, I can combine my profession as a lawyer with my avocation that I really like to do with paranormal and supernatural and Fortean things. So I ended up helping many of the ufologists and researchers and scientists that were interested in these strange esoteric fields over the years, like Dr. James Harder, like Peter Davenport from the National UFO Reporting Center, like Grant Cameron, the Canadian researcher, and even up to the brand new guys out of the block now, Chief Petty Officer Kevin Day of the USS Nimitz and Princeton, and a lot of the veterans from the Tic Tac UFO encounter group. So I've been doing that for well over 35 years now, helping basically the paranormal field with their legal aspects. Periodically, you know, people need to form a nonprofit corporation. They have contracts that they need to review. Someone's throwing in front of their face from one of the cable companies wanting to do an episode or a series about what they're doing. I even helped Peter Davenport purchase, get this, an abandoned Nike missile site in eastern Washington, where he moved his NUFORC, National UFO Reporting Center, database to protect it from any kind of nefarious things that would happen to all the database of UFO sightings that he's recorded over the many, many years he's been in business. So those are just some of the things that you get to do as the old paranormal lawyer now that they call me.
Oh, that's wonderful. Yeah. So a lot of people get into it. I mean, you seem like kind of a normal, logical step to get into this. But do you think somewhere in there you may have had some kind of special encounters? Not to lead the witness, but that's what we find. We interviewed thousands of, people that are in this field.
Yes.
And they may have discovered till much later in life that there was something that sparked their interest, so they started reading the comic books in the first place.
Yes, I've always had that suspicion, definitely. Matter of fact, there are certain things that have popped up in my life that kind of lead me in that direction, although I sure wish I could remember those maybe on-craft encounters. I'll tell you one story that has always stuck with me my whole life that has caused me pause about that whole idea. I remember as a child of probably second or third grade, so it would have been 6, 7, 8 years old, going into a local five and dime store on the corner in our small community that I was living in Washington State. And, the moldings that they had on the storefronts back in those days before you walked into the store, kind of as a little overhang. I looked going into the store and noticed that there was this very big and here's another thing that you're witnessing right now is that I have a very difficult time even saying the word of this insect. This is the big bug-eyed praying mantis. Thank you.
I had the same reaction.
Thank you, Janet. I always have that. I stumble over the idea of the name, and the concept really still hits me, and it gives you an idea of how important I think it is for some reason. I see a giant green praying mantis, a real praying mantis insect underneath the molding of this store as I'm going in. For some reason,
in Ender's Game, the queen of the other society was a giant praying mantis.
Right. You go ahead with yours, and I'll interject some things too. But go ahead, tell your story of the mantis. So you see the mantis.
Yes.
I could never hold them because of this. Okay, you're on to something. Go ahead.
Yeah, it's really. I'm not afraid of spiders necessarily. I'm not afraid of snakes. Those kinds of things. Praying mantises, I'm not like totally terrified of them, but gives me reason to pause. Let me put it that way. And that reaction that I just just happened to me again when I was trying to explain the term praying mantis has always been with me my whole life. So I just give, and of course, in my own research in ufology, and I interviewed many other folks as well that have come in contact with praying mantis type beings, maybe even large ones over 7 feet tall aboard a craft as well. So I know that is in the literature and in the research, but of course, this was well before I even knew anything about those kinds of things growing up. As a young child, I just remember this memory so vividly and nothing else other than that.
Right. So that's interesting because I knew what you were going to say, and I had that. It's just like you get the willies when you think about holding them. But I have a clear memory of the large full-size one. They were so large that when they held me and I was 9 years old, I was the size of an infant in their arms. I was very tiny in their arms, and they comforted. I'm not going to go to the story, but I eventually got to that memory, and then I've done further hypnosis on it. So we call those screen memories. And if you go to a therapist and you say, I'm not sure what's going on here, but sometimes you'll get more information. But like you're a lawyer, you don't want to lead the witness, but these are things that are worth looking at under hypnosis.
Well, just, if you identify with the go back there to that time and imagine that creature, the mantis, and you were having some kind of communication and something was generated to you that stuck with you, and you've been asked to remember it at this time because it's something that you really wanted to know. What is mantis communicating to you as a 10-year-old or however old you were? Yes,
exactly. And now that you've done that, Sasha, I am taking that subconsciously as far as I can, your idea that I can potentially still recover, what that meaning is. I would imagine that if I was 10 years old when I had that reaction, that the experience potentially that conforms to that reaction happened even before that time. Maybe it was quite soon before that time. Maybe it was even prior to that time. But thank you for that suggestion, because I'm going to try to internalize that. Potentially, I will recover some more memories in that regard. My main concern, of course, with hypnosis in my own case is I know so much. I've been through so many transcripts of reverse hypnosis therapy and those kinds of things that I often chide myself that I could very easily confabulate a story. Yeah. And I wonder if that is something that
a suggestion that's very, very important for you to understand that you can stand between you become one with whatever you think or hear or read or see or imagine or dream, and you also can separate from that. And so the idea is, can you do both? See to what both become one with the experience and still retain a different part of you that isn't one with the experience. That's the trick.
Very good. I like that. I think that's a good preparation for that kind of subconscious investigation, that you can differentiate between reality and the experiences that you've had from your own perspective. I like that.
Cool.
So,
but sorry about that. I can't resist.
No. Well, it's all about reality. What is reality? What do we make up? And we've been talking about that a lot in these shows. Is this just a virtual? What do you call it? Synthetic reality? Yeah. So, head make it up. What do you make up? Where do you make it from? How are you going to take the story? You see it in law. You see people, 20 people will witness the same incident, and they have 20 different perspectives. So what is reality? What is not truth? right?
Exactly.
How do you get to the
Yeah,
so
that's
in both in Jungian psychology and revisionist anthropology, we just take what people are saying as their idioverse, and they're telling you in the symbols that they can use what their experience is, instead of judging them on the basis of whether it's objectively verifiable by witnesses or not. In other words, you just start by somebody's myth. It turns out to be somebody's ancestors' description of what they saw and experienced. And that's the way it is for whole cultures, and that's the way it is for individuals too. If you ask each person's subpersonality to look at the same thing that happened, when you kicked your little sister or whatever it was, inside that person, there'll be their inner critic will have a view of it. Their intellect will have a view of it, and so forth. And so it's fascinating. It's all there. We all are fractals of everything, and so everything's accessible to us, and we're accessible to everything. So it doesn't matter what objective reality is, other than in a court of law, you've got certain rules that you agreed to play with.
Yes, you're right. Exactly, Sasha. As a matter of fact, there is a great intersection between the reality that is required, supposedly, for a court of law, and the actual reality of what's going on that can't be quantified in an old case, turn of the century case out of the New York District Court, where literally the testimony of a ghost was enough to convince a trial jury to convict someone of murder. I don't know if we have time, but wow. I can always relate that case to you, and I think you'd find it very fascinating.
Wow. Yeah, that's interesting. So they were admitting ghosts?
The ghost said who killed him.
Ghost. Wow.
Well, here's what happened on this case. It's a very fascinating case where a young woman was murdered. Actually, she disappeared initially. Her mother and her family and everybody were frantic trying to find her. Nothing happened. No, she couldn't be found. No body, no sign of her. And then all of a sudden, one night, her mother is visited by her daughter's ghost. And literally, not in a dream necessarily, this is a ghost visitation, where the mother says that literally her daughter came to her in her room at night and told her exactly what happened to her, how she was killed, where her body was, under the circumstances of how she was killed, which were unique in the fact that if they could forensically find the body and then do the forensics, they would basically be able to confirm that this was the same situation. So the mother, of course, doesn't know really what to do, but eventually she takes it to the local law enforcement authorities, who have a hard time, of course, believing it, but eventually they did send an investigator out to the location that the mother said that her daughter was buried. And of course, then the mother becomes part of the investigation, being potentially she was the one who killed her daughter as well. But literally the information that was given by the mother to the authorities proved the fact that indeed she was there and she was murdered in the same way that she said she was murdered. And in that way of being killed, her mother could not have done it. She would not have been strong enough, in other words, to do that. So in reality, there was a neighbor gentleman who was arrested, brought to trial, and from the testimony of the mother, relaying what the ghost told her daughter, and the jury, making up a jury of the peers in the community, literally believed the testimony and gave a guilty verdict against the gentleman for killing the young girl, who then the gentleman admitted that he did it.
Wow. Complete circle. Good story.
Yes. And that's the very first case where literally the first time an actual testimony of a ghost is used to convict someone of a capital crime.
Wow, interesting. Oh, okay. I lost track of myself. We're coming up. We have 10 more minutes before the break at the top of the hour. Okay, go ahead, continue. We're fascinated with the story.
If you like that story, I've got
one of them tipped Hamlet off too.
That's right. Oh my, you're talking. Well, how about A Christmas Carol? You know, with Marley's Ghost.
Yeah.
All of those wonderful scenes in literature, classic literature, dealing with the reality supposedly of ghosts and those kinds of things. I just love those stories. And of course, every Christmas I have to read A Christmas Carol to myself, at least go through that whole scenario again with the ghosts of Christmas present and past and future, all being portents of, what Scrooge needs to do to change his life, for the better. So that was fascinating. There is another interesting case dealing with the paranormal, literally that changed real estate law. I don't know if you've heard of the idea that, nowadays there are certain disclosures that have to be made before you can purchase or sell a piece of property. And of course, lead paint, the fact maybe that someone had actually died in the property needs to be disclosed in some jurisdictions. Literally the first case in an actual federal district court that proved, I think this was out of Pennsylvania, by the way, and I believe the case was called Sambovsky, Sambovsky, where the purchaser purchased a piece of real estate sight unseen with a beautiful old mansion on it because he had to move quickly to this area. When he gets into his new abode in this beautiful but old and pretty creepy, mansion, he literally comes to find out, or at least he's starting to believe, that this house is literally haunted. He starts asking around to some of his neighbors and the local folks that are in the community because he didn't know anyone. And they all told him, well, of course, that house has been haunted for generations. And we're surprised that you even purchased it because it's been on the market for years and no one wants to go near it. So Mr. Sambovsky says, oh, I'm getting out of here. I want to rescind this real estate contract. So he goes to court. Literally, the bottom line of the testimony of this case has the court ruling as a matter of law that this house was literally haunted. And in that regard, he was able to rescind the contract, get his money back, and get out of the purchase of the property. But the funny thing, or the unique thing about that case, was the very first case on record out of a federal district court where the court itself rules as a matter of law that a house is haunted.
Interesting. My house I grew up with was haunted, so I guess if somewhere in the time it gets sold, my sister's still living in it, but it was very, very haunted. So I guess we'd have to and it's in Pennsylvania, so I never thought of that. We'd have to
very interesting.
Yeah.
Oh my goodness.
Wow.
Yeah.
They're kind of nice ghosts. Don't do anything anymore, but they used to be more mischievous.
Well, isn't that interesting? The idea that ghosts potentially could change over a period of time, maybe get used to their situation, get used to the residents that they're sharing the place with. I don't know. That's a very popular idea.
They were kind of upset. They were upset when my mother was alive. And then when my mother died, this is a long story, but my mother came and got me astrally when she died and took me back to the family house. And I'm in Maui and she's in Pittsburgh. So I go back to the house and she says, see, I took them with me. And she showed me that the house was clear. And so I guess it's clear now. But before, when I grew up, and there were just many ghosts all the time, and I would bring my girlfriends over, and I'd say, "You want to stay overnight?" And they'd say, "Sure." You want to see a ghost? Sure. And a lot of them, some of them were brave and came back. Some said, "I'm never coming to your house again." That's a shame because I live there, and they're kind of interesting. So I grew up with ghosts, so I got used to them.
Yeah.
But they were mysterious. They would come and stand at the foot of the bed. They would make noises. They could freak out people. They would just show themselves too. So,
were these the type of spirits that you could recognize from time to time, or are they different ones always?
Well, I think one was my mother's mother or her grandmother, because they both died in that house. It was an old woman. There was a man that all you could get was his head, and we did a seance. As kids, we did a seance. And he said, by writing on a piece of paper, he said that he was the original builder of the house, which went back to 1840s. And, it was an 1840s farmhouse originally.
Wow.
So anyway, I have a whole history of that, of dealing with ghosts, but I never thought of that. Well, probably won't be my problem. It'll just get left to the next person in our family, one of the nieces or nephews, and they'll have to figure out what to do with it. They might not even think to say it was a haunted house.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see what the younger generation does to deal with that.
Yeah. So, but all right. So we have 4 more minutes. Go ahead. Continue. We've fallen into your story. What else would you like to say before the break?
Well, I tell you what, I literally, at one point, we probably want to get into some of the amazing things that are going on in disclosure regarding the paranormal, UFOs, and things that are happening that might be more concrete that we can point to. For instance, the Tic Tac UFO encounter with the U.S. Navy in 2004. And some of those kinds of things would be very interesting. Potentially even the Admiral Wilson smoking gun memo of the century in ufology that I've been involved with from the very beginning as well could be interesting to talk about.
Okay, we will talk about the Tic Tac UFO and Admiral Wilson. Because I don't know, is anything short enough to do before the break? We have 3 minutes.
No, you don't waste a big deal on.
Well, we have 3 minutes.
Build us some suspense. That's that.
Well, let me just give you a little preparation for these things, because in reality, let's all think of the idea that prior to December 16th, 2017, literally for decades, all the way back into the 1940s, we could have said, I don't know the disclosure. The government is actually going to come out and confirm anything. They just keep saying, of course, Project Blue Book was closed in 1969. We're not into, investigating those things any longer. So we're not taking them seriously. And then all of a sudden, the New York Times comes out on the front page of their program, of their paper, with the article that confirms the existence of UFOs for the first time in history. And in reality, from that point on now, the game has changed, and literally things are happening so quickly as far as disclosure goes on mainstream media, on cable channels, and in the press that is just astonishing. And we can get into those details when we come back for sure.
What do you think sparked them coming forth with that?
Now, that's the $64,000 question that we're going to definitely delve into for sure. What would motivate them to do that after all these decades of denial? That's what I want to know as well. I think it's very, very fascinating that indeed that's what's going on here. There's a concerted effort to red pill the public in this entire arena.
What about the new Space Force, new division of the military? Isn't that something? What's that about, right?
That's exactly right.
That information too, yeah.
Well, that's the question. Okay. Why are they doing that now?
Yeah. Why now? Well, that'll be great. We'll have a lot to cover when we come back after the break. And do you have a book or anything or a website that we can promote for you?
I have a website at UFOiteam.com, and I have a book, quite a few books up on Amazon listed under Michael W. Hall. One of them being a time travel love story called Somewhere in Time, a Midlife Memory.
Aloha and welcome back to the Sacred Matrix. And I am your host, Janet Lessin, with my co-host, Dr. Sasha Alex Lessin. Our producer is Thomas Becker, also known as the Mad Painter. You're listening to Revolution Radio Studio B, and our guest is Michael W. Hall, the Paranormal Lawyer. And before we get back to our show, I'd like to remind everybody to please go over to revolution.radio, the website, and go up to that donation button at the top left and make your one-time donation, or go to the Patreon link and you can make a recurring donation. And really soon here in the next probably couple of weeks, we will have the archives back and running. So everybody who donates at least $5 a month will get full access to the archives, and they go back for several years. And so you can just put on Revolution Radio and play it nonstop for the rest of your life while you're home in coronavirus pandemic shutdown. That'll be good listening. Okay, Sasha, what would you like to say before we bring back Michael?
Okay, so we were looking at what is it? What is the push and pull? What's involved in disclosure? The hypothesis that I would have that just comes right from my heart and from all the people that we've interviewed is that disclosure involves knowing about murder, kidnapping, terrible things that have been done with money that has been stolen from the people and from their governments. And that's what disclosure would also entail. Such a tremendous amount of terrible instances of bribery and genocide that's what is holding up the rest of disclosure. I wonder what you think about that hypothesis, Michael.
Okay, we'll let you go, Michael. What do you think about that? And go ahead. Tell us about what you know about disclosure. What's happening?
Yeah, that's a great analysis, Sasha. The disclosure of UFOs, the fact that, life may exist on other planets and may be visiting our planet, literally is just the tip of the iceberg, of course. Once that one domino falls, I think you're right. There will be a whole lot of other things that will have to be explained and will come to the fore as well. Regarding cryptids, Bigfoots, spirituality, ghosts, consciousness, all of these things. Of course, my client, longtime client Grant Cameron, has said are all connected somehow.
Oh yeah.
And of course, Jacques Vallée, the famous computer scientist who is one of the grandfathers of ufology, literally said that he would be very surprised if these extraterrestrial beings are just from another planet. Potentially, we're talking about multi-dimensions, things that don't really fit into the matrix that we realize that we're living in or think we're living in. So the idea being that I think once one of these dominoes falls, it's going to tip a lot of the other ones over, and many of this disclosure is going to be widespread and will uncover, unfortunately, maybe fortunately, of course, but some unfortunate events, let's put it that way, that you've talked about. The whole idea of murder and mayhem and control has been happening on the planet for eons and eons of our history.
But on the flip side, it might open us to these technologies that could clean up the environment, that could get us out in space. Apparently, we've already been in space, but we'll be officially in space interacting with other extraterrestrials officially, learning from them, perhaps new governance systems that are actually kind and loving and take care of our population without making us slaves to the corporate elite. There's all kinds of possibilities and potentiality. So you mentioned Grant Cameron. He's a friend of ours. We've had many conversations with Grant. He's been on the show a number of times. And he's been kind of leading the way, but I know that he really wants to see the wormholes and how you get through the inner dimensions. What do you know about all these things with your research? How is this going to unfold? You mentioned Admiral Wilson and the Tic Tac UFO and the announcement on the New York Times. Tell us, fill that in for our listeners here, a little history and then where we're going.
Yeah. Well, let's get into the modern idea of disclosure that literally took place on a surprising basis on December 16th of 2017. When the New York Times, which has always been very serious and debunking the issue of the paranormal, of UFOs, the New York Times on the front page article above the fold comes out with proof, supposedly from the Department of Defense, the Pentagon officials, that UFOs, UAP as well, unidentified aerial phenomena, literally exist. They don't know what they are, and that they've been studying them recently for this $22 million program that they have been going on for 5 years, from 2007 to 2012, basically, where Senator Harry Reid found the black budget money to appropriate to Robert Bigelow, the hotel tycoon out in Nevada that was interested in this subject, to study not only UFOs, but the Skinwalker Ranch and all the spiritual, you could even say hauntings and strange activity going on out there in the Utah area on what they call the Skinwalker Ranch. So that is in 2017. All of a sudden, not only on the New York Times, but on that very same day, the online publication called Portico and the Washington Post, the very conservative Washington Post, all three come out with their own versions of the same story, that literally UFOs exist, and our government has been studying them, which of course flies in the face of the idea that what the Air Force has always been saying, that since 1969 they had closed down the Project Blue Book investigation that the military did on UFOs, and that they had not been involved in the study of those objects since 1969. So now we know for sure that at least later on, there was at least a 5-year program that spent over $22 million of tax money to do that.
Right.
But in reality,
let me just stop.
Yeah.
They've deliberately confessed that they lied, and you can't trust what we say because we lie. That's what they've just said.
That's exactly what they said indirectly, and anybody that could read through the lines knew that. And of course, anybody who is into the paranormal, ufology, and research was totally aghast at the idea, not necessarily that they've been lying to us, because I think a lot of us had realized that for decades, but the fact that they would actually come forth and confirm that the whole idea of UFOs is real. That was a real astonishing day for me anyway, having been in this field for over 35 years and always knowing behind the scenes that no one is going to confirm anything of reality, what's really happening. But also embedded in that article in the New York Times was literally links to some FA-18 fighter jet gun camera footage of literally military radar, FLIR photography cameras, videos of these Tic Tac UFOs, which was fascinating because there was a big brouhaha at the time that those gun camera footages were leaked. They weren't authorized to be let go to the public, but of course they're on the front page of the New York Times now, and so they're having to deal with that.
What's Tic Tac? What's that mean? I don't get it. What's Tic Tac?
Let me explain that. That's what they called them, in quotes, Tic Tac, because in reality, they were shaped like the Tic Tac breath mint, exactly the same proportions, but 40 feet long, much bigger, almost the size, Commander David Fravor says, one of the FA-18 pilots that sighted these things. He says almost the size of his entire jet, his FA-18 fighter. So it just became nicknamed the Tic Tac UFO encounter on the USS Nimitz. Now, this whole embedded gun camera footage led to the entire story that now was leaked that previous to this, in 2004, the U.S. Navy and the Nimitz Carrier Group, which is the USS Nimitz aircraft carrier, the Princeton radar ship, and many other ships that go along with a radar group like this, is including in a submarine, AWACS above the air radar ships as well, aircraft. And literally during that time in 2004, the story goes from another client of mine that I befriended after the event and have been representing for a while now. Chief Petty Officer Kevin Day was the radar operator on the Princeton. To explain the USS Nimitz UFO encounter, he says that on about November 4th of 2004, he's manning his radar on the ship next to the Nimitz when he notices there are multiple flights of 5 and 10 radar return objects that are coming from north to south off the coast of San Diego and Catalina Island and moving very slowly, only 100 knots an hour. So he's wondering what kind of flying object this would be going that slow, but not giving off any propulsion returns like some kind of heat signature that would show that there's a jet or even a helicopter, kind of propelling this thing along. And literally for the next almost 10 days, he says, he sees multiple flights of these objects just kind of going very slowly from north to south and disappearing beyond his radar scope off the coast of Baja, Mexico. When he finally brings it up to his captain aboard, the captain had no idea what he was talking about, didn't really say anything until they literally are going to send up an exercise of 2 FA-18 fighter jets to do a mock battle with the other military Marine FA-18s off the coast. And they're going to launch them from the Nimitz and do their exercise. At that point, Kevin Day says to the captain, why don't we vector one of these FA-18s out to where these things are off the coast a little bit farther to the west and see if we can get an eyeball on these. And that's exactly what happened. They got a hold of Commander David Fravor, who had just been launched to do this war games off the Nimitz, and his wingman, who was in a separate FA-18 jet, and the wingman was a woman pilot. Both of those pilots have what they call secondary officers in the back seat doing their radar and weapons systems called WIZOs. So there's 4 pilots now up aloft. And at that point, they get vectored to this position that they don't know why they're going there, but they're breaking off the exercise and sending them out farther west to a plot point that they've been directed to. Now, literally, when they get there, they don't see anything. They don't know why they're being sent there, but literally at one point, they look down at the surface of the ocean. They're about 28,000 feet at this point, and they see some boiling activity, white water at the top of the surface of the ocean. It seems to be in a very long, elongated oval, maybe the size of, Commander Fravor said, a 747 commercial airliner. At that point, both Commander Fravor and his wingman think that this could be a commercial airliner down, and they've been vectored out there to check it out. So Commander Fravor tells the wingman, you stay up here at 28,000 feet. I'm going to spiral down and take a closer look of what we're dealing with. And as he's doing that, he realizes through his cockpit that he can see a white dot, like a tic-tac shape, that literally is ping-ponging back and forth over this white water that's boiling on the surface of the ocean. Or at least not boiling, but it's white water, so he doesn't know why it would be white water. He literally says, Commander Fravor, it looks as if it was like a ping pong in the bottom of a jar, just bouncing very fast back and forth. No acceleration change, just bouncing back and forth frantically. Literally at one point, Commander Fravor, in his spiral down, says that this object stopped on a dime in the middle of the ocean above the whitewater and literally locks on to his jet. And at that point, Commander Fravor tells the Wizzo in the back seat and his wingman, and of course, everyone on the ships that are listening into his intercept, I'm engaged. He's literally been engaged by his radar system with an unknown. Now, this object then starts spiraling up to see him. Literally, if you're talking about the clock face, if Commander Fravor would be at the 10 o'clock position, this object would have been opposite him, maybe at the 4 or 5 o'clock position. And they're spiraling up and down towards each other, getting closer and closer. And Commander Fravor is saying, literally, I'm engaged, I'm engaged. And at one point, to bring this whole thing into a landing for us here, he says that this thing, or what he did is he decided, being an A-type personality Top Gun pilot like he was, he was tired of playing this game. He cut off. He wanted to cut the circle, go straight across, right at it, try to get as quickly, as closely as he could to this object to get a visual and see if he could get a lock on, because his Wizzo could not get a lock on the target on his radar in the back seat. So Commander Fravor at one point says he got within a half mile of this object, and literally a half mile, 2,000 something feet, before an object, when you're in an FA-18 jet with afterburners, is very close. And he says suddenly this object streaked completely directly at him and left him in the dust, went behind his canopy, and disappeared in a split second. He said there's no way that anything that he knows of technology can do that, let alone not have break the sound barrier multiple times and have any sound or wash as it went by. He was totally dumbfounded. He told everyone, well, it's gone. What do we do now? And of course, back on the ship, they're saying, well, I guess we better go back and continue on with the war games exercise. So we want you to head towards your cap point. which is about 80 miles to the north, up north of Catalina Island, and get ready for the war games. When all of a sudden, Sobin comes on from the radar ship and says, "Commander, you're not going to believe this, but that tic-tac UFO that just disappeared over your cockpit, it is now waiting for you at your cap point." And of course, they're going, "Oh my, how did this thing even know where their cap point was? How did it get there so quickly? And what was going on?" So literally, Commander Fravor was asked to, at that point, abort the mission for the war games and get back on the ship, do the debriefing. And as Commander Fravor, of course, is getting out of his jet and going into the debriefing, he runs across the next flight of pilots that are going back up, continuing on with their portion of the war games. And Commander Fravor tells the next pilot, "Do you have FLIR? You got your FLIR photography ready? Keep it up and running, because you might run into these UFOs." Indeed, that is the camera footage that we see nowadays on the internet. The second flight of FA-18 jets off the Nimitz caught these UFOs on their FLIR photography. And that's basically what the Navy is now talking about, confirming very recently, within the last month or so, that whatever they did get on radar during those times is completely unidentified. That is the UFO Nimitz encounter.
So they've done some additional confirmation, you're saying?
Yes, because there had been a lot of banter back and forth that maybe these videos from the that were purported to be from gun camera footage were faked, were not really from the gun camera footage of the FA-18 jets, not really from the USS Nimitz, and not authorized to be released by the Pentagon. There was always that after the event. And just a couple months ago, the Navy came out with a final conclusive announcement that, indeed, these gun camera footage of the tic-tac shaped UFOs are from the FA-18 jets off the Nimitz, and they are totally unidentified.
So what's motivating all this disclosure?
Bingo, Dr. Sasha. That's the question of a lifetime right now. And I have many theories. I have multiple theories we can talk about. The idea being that you would think, after decades upon decades, and literally eons upon eons of hiding the ball regarding disclosure and the truth of what's really going on in our near-Earth and interstellar atmosphere, that the change happening so quickly in December 16th of 2017 must have some motivation behind it. So the theory is maybe it's motivated by the powers that be that are running the planet for some reason, and that there could be the idea that this is motivated as well by maybe off-planet sources giving an ultimatum to the powers that be on the planet. The only thing we can think of at this point is there's something major about to happen to warrant the idea of having to red pill the public on this entire subject matter so quickly. It's never happened in the history of our planet.
Michael Sala has been saying that, these three aliens, one of which is a blue guy with feathers, have basically sealed in, and they negotiated even with Corey Goode and others, and Kissinger was supposedly there too. And the big deal was, what about the oligarchs who have stolen all this stuff, and they won't know, you can't get out. That's what they're saying. You can't leave. You've got to somehow settle up. And Kissinger was representing people and said, just let us go. We'll go to some other place. We don't have to stay on Earth. No, we're not letting you out. You've got to work this out somehow. So anyway, what do you think of all that stuff?
I take that very seriously. I've listened to Corey Goode and David Wilcock as well. And the whole idea that this is motivated by some kind of a ultimatum off planet makes a whole lot of sense to me. Or the ultimatum could be, listen, if you don't disclose what's truly going on your planet, for instance, the powers that be, then we will do it for you. The extraterrestrials might say, the off-planet civilizations, maybe the Federation that's out there, because the planet has been kept back consciously for way too long. So in either scenario, it seems like there's a major imperative that either the powers that be need to get ahead of the spin that's going to happen once the truth comes out, or they need to, like you said, protect themselves somehow for the blowback, the massive blowback that seems to be happening or will basically happen once the truth is out regarding what's been going on as far as keeping all of us in the dark over all these long period of years.
I think it has something to do, it ties in with the coronavirus. This is part of it as well. It's like waking us up to a higher level of consciousness. And see, I work with the extraterrestrials. It's very complicated because there's many different factions in the extraterrestrial realm. There are those who want us to see us succeed and those who want to see us fail. There's a faction that wants to sell us off, that we're some kind of product, that it's time to, time for the harvest, time to collect, that we've been sold and we're just a bunch of, animals, and we're going to be shipped off for secret space program slaves and sex slaves and military slaves. That's one faction that's been emerging. I'm hoping it's not so dark. I'm focusing on the light side of existence, but apparently right now we're going through our birth pangs, and this whole thing that the coronavirus is part of this disclosure. Now it's supposed to, things are supposed to shift by fall. Hopefully what we'll learn is the lesson we're supposed to learn, which is that we are one species, that we need to unify, that we need to love each other, that we need to stop acting this way that we've been acting. We've been acting like the global police and the universal bullies, and we've got to be kind and loving and respect all life, and we haven't been respecting all life, and we've been wiping out life forms and species like there's no tomorrow, and they've been collecting us, our DNA and our genetics, and saving animals, but we've got to stop it ourselves, because this is the most beautiful planet in existence, and we're just treating it like dirt. And Gaia is conscious too. Go ahead, Sasha.
Well, basically, what we can see now is the death of the benevolent common narrative, that it's a bunch of lies, and what we really have is an exploitive system where oligarchs take them as much as they can from everybody else, and everybody else gets less and less, and it's like people are waking up, whatever their ways of symboling it, to it's a bunch of lies, and we can do better than that if we just come from our hearts.
Yes, I would agree with you there. Indeed, whether this coronavirus is part of the powers that be or just a natural event, in any case, what it's doing is, I think, allowing people the time that they need at this critical point to make these inner judgments about themselves and their lives. And I believe we're going to come out of this experience of a lockdown with a much higher consciousness level as far as the community goes. And basically we'll be, I think, ready at that point to more easily join the cosmic community out there that is probably waiting for us, and have been for a long time.
Yeah, I've been in many council meetings, and there have been ambassadors from humanity that have been asking for intervention to help accelerate this evolution of consciousness, so we can, join the Federation. I I have implored to them to please, do some kind of intervention. But I'm not the only one. There's many, many, many ambassadors, and so, and they seem receptive. There was, of course, that non-interference clause that Star Trek talked about, but there comes a point where we're in danger of destroying the whole system, and they won't allow the entire system to be destroyed down to like the blowing up of a planet, the destruction of a planet to that level. And they've invested a lot in the human species and in this planet. So this is part of their experiment. So while they want to let us evolve and grow and become conscious, when it starts to devolve faster than it evolves, they do intervention. And that's apparently, from what I've learned from my studies and from my actual interaction, this is a period of intervention.
Yeah, from my perspective of the people that have the fractal of the Anunnaki and resonating powerfully within them, it's the time for the Enki or Aquarius to return. And basically, this is the time when it's really the Satya Yuga. Everything is going to be a very golden age, and the Anunnaki, they say, they're back to make up for the terrible things that we had going during the Kali Yuga, when Marduk, Satan, was in charge and pitting everybody against each other, and that he too wants to make amends, and he's got people with him from the Galactic Council who are saying, one misstep again and we'll blow you away, but we don't want to have to do that. And so anyway, there's so many wonderful alternative ways we can go, but that's one that no matter how you symbol it, people are sensing. Yes.
And I also sense the idea of the powers that be panicking at this time amongst themselves. It's almost like, the rats want to leave the ship. They can't leave the ship, so they're fighting amongst each other as well on the planet for some kind of control once everything shakes out. And I think the panic that we see worldwide at this point is a reflection of that as well. I think you're right.
It's so interesting. I can't let this go. To go back to this thing about the soldiers of Germany and the soldiers of the Allied forces facing each other and celebrating together and becoming buddies and so forth. When the generals heard about this, there's been all these historians. When the generals heard this was happening, they said, "You can't do that. You got to fire." But the men didn't want to fight because they were friends. They would just sort of had some agreement that at night you could fire, but you didn't fire during the day. And somehow working out. And the generals still found out, and they ordered the men to sing this chorus of this beautiful German song, and the Germans who had been keeping their head down during the time when it was okay to fire all stood up, and they were going to sing with the Yanks and the Brits, and that's when they opened the barrage and killed all those people. And so it's the generals, got it? It's the generals, not the people. And it's still the same story.
Yes, exactly. And that's, I think, what is going on as far as the idea that maybe these off-world conscious beings or whatever they are finally putting their foot down, maybe in a Federation level, saying, this is too much, this is enough. I just sense that there's some major issues going on. The only thing that explains the fact that the powers that be on the planet would actually want to disclose the whole idea of extraterrestrial life, I believe, would potentially want to make a spin out of this and say, there are evil extraterrestrials out there that we need to arm ourselves against. I think that might be their last-ditch effort as far as how they're going to spin the idea of the fact that people are visiting this planet from elsewhere.
So we had a conference in October 2018, and we had, what was his name? Randy Kramer. And Randy Kramer was explaining that there's a whole group, we're in active trade with thousands of species, and so they're beyond this little game that we have here on Earth. It's a whole different perspective, and so he was explaining that they want to evolve humanity and get us past this, and they were talking about the alien invasion and false flag events, and part of it also included the second coming of Jesus. So we were discussing it. Didn't have every detail, but and then of course it comes out in ufology that there's going to be mass arrests, and all these stories are being put out there, and I can't help but think that there's going to be something completely different than what they're putting out there, because it's all kind of propaganda. Nothing gets out there unless they want it out there, right? So we get to talk about this stuff, and we're not really endangering anybody who's in control and losing their control. So I'm wondering, I'm stuck with you're saying that this ship went back to the ship was intelligent, and it knew, it was able to anticipate what they were going to do, right? And knew where they were going to go. And that's what, what's his name? The one you work for, Grant Cameron.
Grant Cameron.
Conference. He said, we can never shoot them down because they read our minds, and they know we're going to think before we think it. See, they're already way ahead of us. So he said that what I discovered with other whistleblowers and people that are experiencers is that all these ships that we were given were delivered. They were intentional so that we would evolve and become more conscious, and to help accelerate humanity's progress, because it's taking too long, right? It's slow. We're kind of stupid, right? So they deliver us ships. They make us think that we're so smart that we lock them, we shot them down in the air, blah, blah, blah. But they were actually delivering them. So that's what happened at Roswell. I don't know if you've encountered this information, but I've encountered this in numerous ways with dozens of different people, and I've interviewed about 30 of the secret space program people. So I have a whole different perspective. I don't know what's going to come, but I think it's a lot of disinformation out there, a lot of stories, and a lot of people are falling for it because we're so hungry for disclosure. And it's like, get on with it. What are you waiting for?
The thing is to access your inner Messiah, the part of you that has the message for humanity, and live that.
Yeah, that's one way to do it. Back to you.
Well, I agree with both of you in that regard. And definitely that's exactly what we need to do during this time of reflection that we're forced to engage in right now, is check out our inner Messiah. Literally. That's Jesus's entire mission on the planet, was to say that God is within each one of us. We don't need to have the priestly caste to explain to us what God is all about. And that's what the New Testament was all about. So I think this is kind of very appropriate. We're talking about these subject matters today on Easter Sunday. The good segue that we're doing here about the whole idea of Roswell, New Mexico. And like you said, Janet, being the idea that we were given this technology, it wasn't necessarily crashed, by mistake, is basically mentioned in the Admiral Wilson smoking gun memo of this century as well. And this is a good segue to get into the idea that literally we have got an amazing document that was literally found in the estate papers of the late Dr. Edgar Mitchell, Apollo 14 astronaut, sixth man to walk on the moon. And the idea that Edgar Mitchell had been involved in ufology and in consciousness studies for many, many years, the Free Foundation, Noetic Sciences, and was literally on the board of directors of Robert Bigelow's NIDS, National Institute of Discovery Science, along with high-level government scientists like Dr. Kit Green, Dr. Eric Davis, Hal Puthoff, Russell Targ, and those kinds of folks who were studying the whole issue of UFOs. If we would like, I can get into the idea of how I became involved in the Admiral Wilson memo and how Grant came across it because I think it's a fascinating story.
Good.
The idea was I get a phone call. Actually, it was an encrypted text, by the way, initially, from, I didn't know who initially, but all of a sudden I look on my phone. This was January 2nd of 2019. January 2nd of last year. I'm looking at my phone and I'm getting an encrypted text, which I've never received before from anyone. I didn't even know how to access it. I didn't know if I wanted to access it, to tell you to believe it. I just didn't know what was going on. Decided I better figure out who's trying to get a hold of me. Come to find out, it's my client, Grant Cameron. He sends me this cryptic message via text that says, Michael, I'm about ready to drop a major UFO information bomb, and I need to run it by you as the paranormal lawyer before I do that.
Wow.
And of course, I'm going, you got to be kidding me. Grant Cameron is telling me that he has a major UFO information issue that he's going to release. Now, this is the same gentleman, Grant Cameron, who literally came across the smoking gun memo in the 70s from a high-ranking Canadian official who claimed that the USA had told him that the highest classified subject in the United States is unidentified aerial phenomena, that they're treated seriously, and it's the highest classified subject matter in the U.S., even higher than the H-bomb. And Grant Cameron found that memo in the 1974-5 era when he was studying. So when Grant Cameron says something you knew and unique is coming on, you sit up and take notice. Well, to make the story as shorter as I possibly can, Grant literally says that he was at a conference in the Southwest United States when he's approached after his speech by a gentleman from Australia. And I can release the name of that gentleman now because he's also a client of mine now, but he's authorized me to let people know who he was. His name is James Rigney, and he is an Australian ufologist who says that he literally got a phone call one day from a friend of his in Northern Australia who said that he had come across a whole bunch of banker boxes of Edgar Mitchell's estate papers, because Edgar Mitchell's family just didn't have any interest in the subject of UFOs or anything that Edgar Mitchell was doing at that time, and needed to get rid of a lot of the paperwork that he had. So the friend in Australia took over all these banker boxes, had no idea what they were in, what was in them, and literally was not into UFOs. But of course, his friend, James Rigney, another Australian, was. So he made a deal that he could go through those boxes, and James Rigney, literally, after hours and hours of scouring through Edgar Mitchell's documents, comes up with a 15-page transcript purported to be from the high-level government scientist by the name of Eric Davis, Dr. Eric Davis, interviewing, at that time, the Joint Chiefs of Staff, second in command, Admiral Thomas Ray Wilson, on the subject of UFOs. And this was in 2002. It seems what had happened was Admiral Wilson had been debriefed on the subject of black ops, reverse engineering programs, unacknowledged special access programs that were going on under his nose that he didn't know about by none other than Dr. Stephen Greer and Edgar Mitchell. And when they left the debriefing of Admiral Wilson back in 1997, that took place, they left him with some phone numbers and a debriefing document he could follow. And lo and behold, Admiral Wilson made a few phone calls, and thinking that this was just going to be dismissed and people were going to laugh at the idea, in reality, he gets vectored into an unacknowledged special access civilian contractor who is supposedly reverse engineering alien technology. Now, when I relay this story in my mind, I'm always thinking of the movie that I can see later on, decades from now, about this whole event. I can see Tom Hanks as Admiral Wilson, that character. And he's been told now that Admiral, there's some stuff going on behind your back you don't know about. Here are some phone numbers. Check them out if you don't believe us. And this was, of course, Dr. Stephen Greer of the Disclosure Project and Dr. Edgar Mitchell of the Free Project. Now, when he finds this group out, he demands to be read into their program because he says, I am in charge of all of these unacknowledged special access programs, and you have failed to brief me on what you're doing. Initially, Admiral Wilson thinks that he's going to see these folks and shake them down and find out probably they're just reverse engineering Soviet or Chinese technology, and they're probably using the UFO cover-up idea as just a smokescreen to keep people off the track. So in reality, Admiral Wilson meets with the program director of this subcontractor, civilian subcontractor, the security officer, who used to work for the NSA, by the way, and their attorney. These three gatekeepers, they call themselves, were there to keep a lid on the activity of this unacknowledged special access program that they were working on. Admiral Wilson, in this special information facility, safe information facility called a SIF, where no electronic devices are able to record anything, finds out in his pressing against these guys that this is not a terrestrial research technology program. Literally, at one point, the program director looks to the attorney, who is one of the gatekeepers, when Admiral Will presses them on this whole thing, and says, "What do we do?" And of course, at that point, the attorney, not the security director or not the program director, says, "Go ahead and tell them." I thought that was ironic that the attorney was the one in charge at that time. Anyway, yeah, there's attorneys everywhere. They're moles, So anyway, at that point, they tell Admiral Wilson that in 1947, well, they say decades ago, Admiral, we came across some alien technology. Admiral Wilson says, "You mean Soviet? You mean Chinese?" And they tell him, "No, Admiral, not of this world, not made by human hands." And the fact that they also recovered a crashed vehicle, a craft, and alien bodies, both dead and alive. This is all laid out, by the way, in this 15-page, chock-full, single-spaced memo written by Eric Davis as he's interviewing Admiral Wilson. Admiral Wilson is telling what happened during the meeting that he had with this special access program director, security officer, and their attorney. Now, the Admiral is saying, "You got to be kidding me. This is technology from another planet." And they say, "Yes." Literally, they are telling the Admiral that they are in possession of a craft that can travel interstellar space through our atmosphere, underwater, and through dimensions. And that just blew the Admiral away. You got to be kidding. The idea that in a government memo that was written by high-level government scientists, the Admiral Wilson is saying that these people were telling him that they have unworldly, off-worldly technology that literally is blowing everybody away. The bottom line of that whole idea is that the Admiral then says, "Well, thank you for telling me what you told me, but I definitely need to be read into this completely." They refused to do that. He went back to the Pentagon. His friends at the Pentagon then tell him he needs to back down on this entire subject. If he doesn't, he's going to lose a few stars. He's going to lose his pension and never get to that promotion that he really wants in his career. And that's where the story ends, right there on the smoking gun memo of the century that Richard Dolan, the UFO historian is now calling it. And that's how I became involved way back in January 2nd of 2019 with a memo that I have been vetting ever since that time, and I can't come across any mistakes or disinformation that I can prove.
Did they do those awful things to Wilson?
No, because he literally backed down. He went to the Pentagon officials. They told him back down. One of his best friends at the Pentagon came up to him later and said, you know what, don't worry about this. Just drop it. It's not worth going there. And that gentleman by the name of Jacques Gansler threw him a curveball. At the very last page of the memo, Jacques Gansler from the Pentagon tells Admiral Wilson, oh, by the way, UFOs indeed are real, but alien abductions are not real. A little twist at the end there.
Oh, my gosh.
Now, my theory is that Jacques Gansler was probably tasked with giving some disinformation to his friend at the very last minute, just in case Admiral Wilson decides he wants to go rogue. Because if he comes out and says, oh, yeah, UFOs are real, but you know what, alien abductions aren't real, to the UFO community, they would totally discredit anything that he said, you know, because obviously the fact that UFO alien abductions seem to be happening everywhere around the world is something that people have been talking about forever.
Wow. So we're 2 minutes almost out of time. And then I heard a variation that they delivered 5 craft that first week of 1947. And it was intentionally delivered in 5 locations around the earth. One was Pine Gap, Russia. Anyway, to create a grid of surveillance. And it was like the Trojan horse. So everybody that got one pulled it into their underground installations so they wouldn't be seen. And I don't know. There's all kinds of fun stories. I don't know if we'll ever get the truth. But last 2 minutes for you. Take it away.
Well, that's a very good analysis as well, because, the bottom line of the memo said, Admiral Wilson's memo says that these reverse engineering programs are having a very difficult time trying to figure out how these things work. So indeed, it could be the Trojan horse factor on this thing as well. But I have just been amazed in my career over the last decades, but now last few years, how quickly things are happening in the mainstream media. They're talking about these UFOs being real on Fox News, on MSNBC, and all the cable channels coming out with their shows like Unidentified and Project Blue Book, and the UAPX group with Chief Petty Officer Kevin Day coming out shortly with their own television series about going back out and having an expedition to find those Tic Tac UFOs again. So the mainstream is now becoming so involved in red-pilling the public, you wonder what is coming next in the next few months down the road that we're going to be dealing with as well.
You have a question, Sasha?
It's a good show. It's really a good show. Your life right now, whatever it is a good show.
Okay, thank you so much for coming on. Thank you, listeners. Much love and blessings and aloha. We'll see you again on Tuesday, 8 p.m. Eastern. Aloha.